Since we last spoke, John, you've done a residency with the military, which seems to have been quite influential. You spent some time with the peacekeeping forces in Timor in 2008. Tell us something about that.
Well, I was approached by the Australian War Memorial to do an official artist gig. So this is something that has happened reasonably regularly. Artists have always gone with the military to their various theatres of deployment. But the program was stopped after the Vietnam War, and it kick-started again with Rick Amor going to Timor-Leste. And they then slowly reinstituted the program again with artists going, and I was invited to go, or to think about it rather, in about 2006, and we started this long dialogue about doing it. And I'm ultimately, just very, very thankful that I said yes to the opportunity, and that I've had the opportunity, because it's actually had quite a profound effect on my work, both in terms of the reorientation of the figure back into the work, and this idea that the work has become much more about the way figures occupy space, or that the way they occupy these territories, and also the coloration of the work, this use of what I call the night vision greens.
The greens.
One of the really beautiful things about working with the Australian War Memorial was that they gave me a complete carte blanche to devise a project. And, with my work practice, I don't really think in terms of defined projects before I begin a body of work. It begins in a fairly organic way, and then I find sets of ideas through the making of the work. So I've got half an idea, and then it kind of starts. But one thing I took to the meetings almost immediately was this idea of being able to get a hold of night vision goggles, and that I didn't want to sit in a camp. So if you go to the more active theatres of deployment, for example, had I chosen to go to Afghanistan or Iraq, there's no way you can really leave the army bases, because these are quite dangerous, places. So I knew there was a fair bet that in Timor-Leste, which is regarded as a peacekeeping mission now, that I'd be able to follow the soldiers around, and that as they went out on their own kind of forays, that I would pick up, very usable imagery, and that in particular it was the night patrols that I was interested in.
It plugs right back to your early St Kilda works, looking down from Grey Street apartments onto the live, the huddles of people gathering together for what purpose one might only ponder.
Well, that's exactly right, David. There's been an amazing circularity in this for me, because if I think back to my work from about 1985, I'd say, or 86 at least, onwards, there's been this very pronounced way of making the work, which has this kind of filmic quality. It has this, panoptic view looking down. It has this sort of scopophilic kind of enterprise to it, and it's really about this sense of, the voyeur, in a sense, looking in on a scene. So it really, without realising it, it was almost a return, but in a very focused and I think, quite a challenging way to be in a place like Timor-Leste, where it's not as though I've got a lot to do with that particular territory, but to find something in it and out of that to make work about was, I think, really, just a great moment of clarity for me personally, and it's given my work, fresh legs in a way.
The experience of East Timor was it firmly took away, it moved the idea of the lines in your painting away from the sort of the sawtooth modern city to the idea of the map quite firmly, and you use the maps of Timor. less about cities, more about modes of communication?
Yes, yeah, I tend to agree. And in fact, one of the things that I was affected by quite a lot were the daily briefings we'd have. And I'd notice all of these contour maps on the walls around me, you know, these sorts of intelligence maps that might be about the topography of the landscape or the movements of the troops. I didn't really understand how they operated, but visually they were very compelling, you know, and it seemed to me that they were usable in a funny way because, again, they were about this kind of aerial mapping of terrain or movement, motion, communication, that kind of thing. So, whereas in the paintings that I had been making about the city, there is that sense of that being a kind of mapping. The architectonic view is much clearer, whereas in some of these more recent works, there is a sense of architecture still, but it's breaking up into a sense of topographical mark making.
That's right. We spoke last time, and it's been commented upon in other forums about your work, that you started out studying, well, you were looking to study film, you had an interest in film, and you've also been talking about how artists need to work in the moment. And there's a couple of places that we could take this conversation, but one is, well, why haven't we seen a Jon Cattapan film?
Well, that's actually a good question. It's not as if I don't think about it. I think about it all the time. I think the thing that happened to me when I went to art school was, you know, I actually went to art school as a way of getting to film school.
Yeah.
I thought, you know, well, this would be good. I'll get a tuning in visuality, and then I can go and do some postgraduate study at Swinburne or, you know, VCA or whatever, and go the next level. But there's just a lot to do with painting. There is so much that one can still do, I think, even though I would, you know, have to admit that painting is not a dominant form anymore. But in a way, precisely because it's not a dominant form, one has a kind of freedom to explore a little bit on the margins, you know, and I think that possibility of both working with narrative, but also within the processes of painting themselves, of painting itself, has kept me so interested that I haven't really been able to find that wide open space where I can set it aside and say, okay, now it's time to make a film. I am circling it though.
Yeah.
I am circling it, and indeed, you know, I look at Roy using, you know, what is now very, very attainable technology to shoot high definition video, and I'm understanding that it's ever more possible that those lines, those blurry lines between the amateur and the professional, which I think are very important in the moment of making art right now, I could apply that myself. So I wouldn't rule it out, definitely. But it's, you know, I mean, as one gets older, you know, one kind of defines one's territory more. And for me, I suppose I am known as a painter, and I guess I feel in a funny way, especially since having very recently come back from overseas, that there's more and more to do within it, not less, that it's actually opening up into something even bigger.
One of the things that we were talking about before we started chatting with the camera pointing at us was that you're looking at this idea of rubbish and hard rubbish collections, and the use of that as a kind of a metaphor for issues in contemporary society. It's a little bit of a shift away from using the human figure.
It is, but there's humanity in it.
Absolutely.
You know, so again, this is like, you know, what you put in and what's absent. I suppose the thing that I feel, how this all came about, by the way, was that I just happened to be walking down the street in South Kensington in London and noticed a pile of rubbish that had been put out, and I was immediately struck by the fact that it looked like a raft. You know, that it had been neatly condensed together. Someone's baggage, someone's memories, someone's detritus, things they didn't need anymore, packaged up in a tight form. And as soon as I saw it and photographed it with my iPhone, I thought, you know, that could be quite an interesting idea for another type of surveillance, another type of painting. It's a little bit like rummaging through someone's, you know, private belongings in a way. And so now I've begun, and it's very, very early days. You know, behind me we have one that I've started, and you can see the working photograph that I've got there. It's actually just a pile of rubbish that I took in Smith Street in St Kilda. And the thing about it that really struck me was that this one had this strange Japanese long rice paper lantern sticking out the top of the pile, and it looked so much like a sail, and I thought, this really is like a raft, you know. And yeah, I'm thinking that there's something there. I'm not quite sure where it's going, but what I like about it as a potential exploration for my work is that you can overwrite it with a whole lot of stuff that's to do with this idea of the personal, of personal belongings, of cargo. There's a sense of human cargo there. It takes me right back to those asylum seeker paintings I was making, and so on. Yeah, so who knows? I mean, that's where the work is now. It's very early days.
Talking of being grounded where you are, the work that you're starting to think about that might come through with the hard rubbish, as you alluded to, links back to some of the work that you did regarding the boats and the human immigration, people fleeing wars. Do you see a great need for artists to continue to have their work both poetic on one hand and grounded in a kind of social political reality of the time?
I do for me. I mean, I don't think artists have to do anything in particular. Some artists work through purely formal concerns. Some are very, very conceptually driven. And some are just out and out expressive, you know. I guess there's a little bit of a duality in my own personality, that on the one hand, you know, I can apply what I would think of as a sort of analytical perspective to what I'm thinking about. And then there's another aspect to my personality which is just very much about being in the moment and responding emotionally. Now, the thing about the particular need of perhaps working through recent history, or, you know, the recent social phenomenons that we work through, or the recent political phenomenons, is that I think if you think that way, you should probably use it. You should probably use the moment. As soon as you've done it, you've probably failed in some ways, for two reasons: that it's very hard to freeze that moment and have it have a longer poetic currency. But there is a kind of poetry in attending to the human, you know. So I'm interested in, I guess, ultimately I'm interested in the human scale of these dramas, and if there's a politics in it, it's, you know, it's a very personal politics. There's a very subjective one. If you can bear witness to some of these things in your own intuitive, you know, strange poetic way, I think it's good to have a go at it. I've always thought that, and I think there's a need for it. If you look at what's going on in Australia right now, it's not as if the issue of asylum seekers or justice for refugees has in any way left us, you know. In fact, we've reached a whole new level of strange dislocation from the rest of the world on this issue. So, yeah, I think why not kind of talk about it at least? You're probably not going to change anything, but you get something out of it.